A light in the distance. The rain fell in sheets over Tokyo, blurring the neon lights into a kaleidoscope of color that reflected off the wet pavement. Hana Nakamura stood under the awning of a small convenience store, her umbrella forgotten at home, her dark hair plastered to her face. She clutched a soggy flyer in her hand, its ink smudged but still legible: Rally for Palestine, Hibiya Park, 2 p.m. The words felt heavy, not just from the rain but from the weight of a cause that seemed so far away, yet so close to her heart. Hana was no activist. At 27, she worked as a graphic designer for a mid-sized advertising firm, spending her days crafting sleek logos for toothpaste brands and energy drinks. Her life was comfortable, predictable, orbiting the quiet routines of her small apartment, her morning matcha, and the occasional karaoke night with friends. But something had shifted in her over the past few months. The news, which she used to scroll past with a detached sigh, had started to linger. Images of bombed-out buildings, children with dust-streaked faces, and parents cradling lifeless bodies in Gaza had clawed their way into her dreams. She couldn't unsee them. "Why do you care so much?" her co-worker, Aiko, had asked over lunch the day before, chopsticks paused mid-air. "It's not our fight. We're Japanese. We've got no stake in this." Hana had fumbled for an answer, her words tripping over themselves. "It's not about stakes," she'd finally said. "It's about being human." Aiko had shrugged, unconvinced, and changed the subject to a new ramen place in Shibuya. But Hana couldn't let it go. The question gnawed at her: why did she care? She had no ties to Palestine, no shared religion, no common history, no cultural thread to pull her toward a conflict half a world away. Yet, every time she saw another headline, another image, her chest tightened with a grief she couldn't explain. Now, standing under the awning, she glanced at her phone. 1:45 p.m. The rally was starting soon. She could still turn back, go home, and curl up with a book, safe from the rain and the weight of the world. But the flyer in her hand felt like a tether, pulling her towards something bigger than herself. Hibiya Park was a sea of umbrellas, a mosaic of colors bobbing in the downpour. Hana arrived late, her sneakers squelching as she wove through the crowd. The air was thick with the scent of wet grass and the hum of voices, some chanting, some murmuring, some silent but resolute. A stage had been set up near the park's fountain, where a young woman with a megaphone was speaking in measured, passionate Japanese. "We stand here today," the woman said, her voice cutting through the rain, "not because we share a border or a faith with Palestine, but because we share a heart. Because we know what it means to suffer, to rebuild, to hope. We stand for justice, for humanity, for a world where no one is left behind." Hana's throat tightened. She scanned the crowd, expecting to see mostly foreigners, activists, maybe, or students from abroad. But the faces around her were overwhelmingly Japanese: an elderly man with a faded cap, a mother holding her daughter's hand, a group of college students in raincoats, their signs dripping but defiant. Free Palestine. End the occupation. Humanity over hate. She felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see a man about her age, his glasses fogged from the rain. He held out a small plastic poncho, still in its packaging. "You look like you need this," he said with a shy smile. "Oh, thank you," Hana said, taking it gratefully. "I didn't plan for the weather." "First time at something like this?" he asked, adjusting his own poncho. She nodded, feeling a little exposed. "Is it that obvious?" He laughed softly. "A little. But you're here. That's what matters. I'm Kenji, by the way." "Hana," she said, slipping on the poncho. "Why are you here?" Kenji's smile faded, replaced by a quiet intensity. "My grandfather survived Hiroshima. He used to tell me stories about what it was like to lose everything: his home, his friends, his sense of safety. When I see what's happening in Gaza, it's like I can hear his voice again, telling me that silence is complicity." Hana stared at him, the weight of his words settling into her. She hadn't expected to find someone who understood, not just the cause, but the pull of it, the way it reached across oceans and histories to demand something of you. The rally continued, with speakers sharing stories of resilience and loss.
A Palestinian woman, a refugee now living in Tokyo, spoke of her family's displacement, her voice breaking but unwavering.
A Japanese professor recounted the history of the conflict, his words precise yet heavy with sorrow. And through it all, the crowd stood firm, their umbrellas a canopy of solidarity against the rain. Back at her apartment that evening, Hannah couldn't shake the feeling that she'd crossed a threshold.
The rally had been overwhelming, not just in its scale but in its humanity.
She sat at her small kitchen table, her laptop open, scrolling through photos she'd taken on her phone, a child holding a sign that read "Peace for All," an elderly woman passing out tea to keep people warm, Kenji's silhouette against the gray sky, his face lit with quiet conviction. She opened a new document and began to write, her fingers hesitant at first, then faster, as if the words had been waiting to spill out.
The story of the lantern.
In a city of glass and steel, where the lights never dimmed and the streets hummed with purpose, there lived a young woman named Emmy. She was not a hero, nor did she aspire to be. She was a seamstress, stitching dreams into silk for brides and performers, her days measured by the rhythm of her needle and thread. Emmy's world was small, contained within the walls of her shop, where she listened to the radio and smiled at her customers, never asking for more than what was given.
But one evening, as the city glowed,
under a soft rain, Emmy heard a story on the radio that stopped her hands mid-stitch. It was a story of a faraway land called Alkmaar, where the people lived under a sky that rained fire instead of water. Their homes crumbled, their children wept, and their voices were drowned by the noise of the world. Emmy listened, her heart heavy, as the broadcaster spoke of families torn apart, of dreams reduced to ash.
"Why does this matter to me?"
Emmy whispered to herself, her needle still. She had no kin in Alkmaar, no shared songs or stories. Her city, with its orderly streets and quiet temples, was a world apart. Yet the images the radio painted, of mothers shielding their children, of elders praying for peace, clung to her like damp cloth. The next day, Emmy passed a market stall where a man was selling lanterns, their paper skins glowing softly in the morning light. "For hope," the vendor said, his eyes kind but tired. "Light one, and it carries your wish to the stars."
Emmy bought a lantern, though she didn't know why.
She carried it home, its fragile frame cradled in her arms, and set it on her table. That night, she lit it, watching the flame dance within its paper walls. She thought of Alkmaar, of the people she would never meet, and whispered a wish she barely understood, let them be seen.
Word of Emmy's lantern spread, as small acts often do.
Her neighbor, a baker named Taro, saw the light from her window and asked about it.
Emmy told him of Alkmaar, her voice trembling but sure.
Taro, who had lost his brother to a war long ago, nodded. The next night, he lit a lantern of his own, its glow joining Emmy's in the darkness.
Soon, others followed.
A teacher lit a lantern for the children of Alkmaar, who deserved to learn without fear.
A fisherman lit one for the fathers who could no longer provide.
A grandmother, her hands gnarled from years of work, lit one for the mothers who refused to break. The city, once indifferent, began to shimmer with tiny flames, each one a silent cry for justice.
But not everyone understood.
At the edge of the city lived a merchant named Kenta, whose heart was as cold as the coins he counted. "Why waste your light on strangers?" he demanded, his voice sharp as he passed Emmy's shop.
"Alkmaar is not our burden.
Let them solve their own troubles." Emmy met his gaze, her hands steady now. "If we turn away from their pain, what does that make us?" she asked.
"A light that burns only for itself is no light at all."
Kenta scoffed and walked away, but his steps faltered. That night, as he sat in his grand house, surrounded by wealth but alone, he saw the lanterns glowing across the city. Their light was small, fragile, yet it pierced the darkness with a clarity he could not ignore. For the first time, Kenta wondered if he had been wrong, not about Alkmaar, but about what it meant to live.
Months passed, and the lanterns became a symbol.
People from other cities, other lands, began to light their own, until the world was dotted with
flickers of hope.
Alkmaar's people, though still suffering, heard of the lanterns and felt a warmth they had almost forgotten.
They were not alone. Emmy never became a hero.
She remained a seamstress, her days still measured by needle and thread. But she carried the lantern's light within her, a reminder that compassion could cross oceans, that humanity could bridge divides.
And in Alkmaar, a child looked up at the sky, no longer burning, and whispered a wish of her own: "Let us be free." Hannah stopped writing, her eyes stinging. The story had poured out of her in a single breath, as if it had been waiting for the right moment to emerge. She leaned back in her chair, the rain still pattering against her window, and felt a quiet resolve settle into her bones. The next day, she emailed the story to Kenji, who had given her his contact at the rally. "What do you think?" she wrote, her finger hovering over the send button. She wasn't sure if it was any good, if it captured the ache and the hope she'd felt in Hibiya Park. But she sent it anyway. Kenji replied within hours. "This is beautiful," he wrote. "It's more than a story, it's a call. Can I share it with the organizers? They're looking for ways to spread the message." Hannah hesitated. Her story was personal, raw, a piece of herself she hadn't meant to share with the world. But then she thought of the lanterns, of the people in her story who chose to act, and of the real people in Palestine who needed the world to see them. She typed a single word: yes. Over the next few weeks, Hannah's story spread. It was shared at rallies, posted on social media, translated into English, Arabic, and half a dozen other languages. People read it in coffee shops, on trains, in quiet moments before bed. Some cried. Some lit candles. Some, like Kenta in the story, began to question their indifference. Hannah went to more rallies, each one a little less daunting than the last. She met others like her, ordinary people who felt the pull of a distant cause, who chose to stand up not because it was their fight, but because it was right. She saw Kenji again, his glasses still fogging in the rain, and they laughed about it over hot tea in a cramped cafe. One evening, as Hannah walked home from work, she passed a small shrine near her apartment. Someone had placed a paper lantern there, its light flickering softly in the dusk. A note was tucked beneath it, written in careful, looping script: "For Palestine. For humanity." Hannah stopped, her breath catching. She didn't know who had left it, but it didn't matter. The lantern was enough, a small, fragile light that refused to be extinguished. She thought of her story, of Emmy and Alkmaar, and realized that the real story was still unfolding, in every heart that chose to care, in every hand that reached across borders to hold another. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the lantern, its glow a beacon in the gathering dark. Then she walked on, her steps lighter, knowing that she was part of something vast and unbroken, a chain of humanity that stretched from Tokyo to Gaza, from one heart to another. Take-away message. The story of Emmy and the lanterns is a reminder that empathy knows no borders. It doesn't require shared blood or belief, only the courage to see another's pain as your own. In a world often divided by difference, the choice to act with compassion, to light a lantern, to raise a voice, to stand in the rain for someone else's justice is what binds us together. Moral courage isn't loud or grand, it's the quiet decision to care, to act, to believe that even the smallest light can change the world.